Over the past few weeks, Jordan Hill-Lewis had been widely recognized as being the obvious successor to John Steenhuisen as leader of the DA for the upcoming party leadership conference in April. But while he has received a great deal of positive PR and positive media coverage as a result of his well-connected media management strategist and former Media 24 employee Sarita Engelbrecht, his actual performance as mayor leaves much to be desired, causing many voters in Cape Town already distrusting him a lot. However, most people in the rest of the country do not see what these Cape Townians see. In this video, I would like to explain why Cape Townians has such a severe distrust of Hill-Lewis. It would of course go too far to suggest that Hill-Lewis has been a disaster on the order of the ANC in the Eastern Cape, but the DA over the past 20 years and Jordan Hill-Lewis as a continuation of their regime has overseen significant decline in various areas and had taken cheap shortcuts to solving both real problems and a host of ideologically progressive non-problems, which now run the risk of killing the city forever if they do not reverse them soon. Hill-Lewis has been a protege of Helen Zille since 2006, when she took over as mayor after the ANC's brief time in charge of the city of Cape Town. During those years, the city saw a number of ANC policies piloted by the DA to devastating effect. You see, as with many of the DA's policies, they will be very loud in public opposing the ANC's policies, but when the ANC pushes these policies into effect, they are more often than not, supported by the DA, as is in the famous case of the DA voting for black economic empowerment in 2003. So what did Jordan Hill-Lewis do? In an attempt to radically densify Cape Town, as well as tackling what left-wing ideologues will call apartheid spatial planning, the city has created plans for high-density, low-income housing across the city. Of course, we know who low income pertains to. This would be a reasonable plan in many respects, except for the fact that they are now trying to fit tens of thousands of people into high-rise rent-controlled apartments in high-income areas subsidized by the city. Three cases are worth illustrating here, touching the wealthy, the middle class, and the poorest, respectively. In the first case, Fish Hoek. As the Cape Independent covered, the city tried to expropriate a couple of blocks of suburban property located around Logiel Road on Fish Hoek, as part of a plan to build over 10,000 high-density residential properties. The 2018 attempt to expropriate failed after legal counsel warned it may be unconstitutional for the DA to do so. The city then switched to a plan to dump thousands of squatters into so-called temporary relocation lodgings, essentially building a Blikkiesdorp next to their properties, depressing their property values to the point where the only potential buyer would be, guess what? The city itself, controlled by the DA. This was done to shuffle informal settlers from an area where the city wished to build a highway, but also to prevent the squatter camp from spreading north into much wealthier Noordhoek areas. Then there is the case of the CBD, the Central Business District. The Cape Town CBD, like many other areas of DA-run municipalities, has its municipal services, including basic security and public cleanliness taken care of by private corporations called a city improvement district. This so-called public-private partnerships that the DA are so fond of is also or can also be seen as a Fabian system. The companies providing these services must be selected from a pre-approved list and require a 60% buy-in from residents. While this model may not be cost-efficient for residents, and while the city should ultimately be responsible for delivering the services themselves, the effect is undeniably positive. Cape Town is one of the only CBDs in the country where one can walk and shop in relative security. But the CBD has less than 5,000 permanent residents, and the city aims to pack 50,000 squatters into this tiny area. A move that will undeniably impact the ability of the area to commit to the CID program, which keeps the city and specifically the CBD functional. Dense, rent-controlled, high-rise, state-subsidized or city-subsidized residential properties for low-income populations not only depress the property values, but also create a huge risk for building owners who are already struggling with evictions under the PEI and EST Acts, which combined with the VPUU all but grant the right to seize any property one squats on. But not all squatters are given this treatment. In Eerste Rivier, just south of Old Forer Road, lies Itemba Small Farms. This is a cluster of subsistence farming operations run predominantly by coloured informal settlers, which started when the farmer abandoned this farm in around the 90s. The farm workers stayed on and made the most of it, but seeking a way to place a high-density housing complex, the city and provincial government employed a whole host of intimidation and bribery strategies. Having nowhere to put these people staying here, they threatened people in the neighbouring informal settlement north of Forer Road by claiming that their SASSA grants would be cut off if they didn't vacate this property. A threat these people were unaware the city was not empowered to do at all, since they are not the ones giving out these SASSA benefits. In talking to these occupants, Cape Independent editor Rob Daigen has found that among other things, they forbade these small farmers from building water tanks and several times cut off their access to water entirely. When the residents tried to form representative groups, the government made attempts to bribe them, and in one case appointed an alcoholic vagrant as their representative and continued to treat her as the representative despite a full petition from all the residents objecting to her being their representative. Despite receiving a court interdict in 2010, the city persisted. In 2020, they even tried to use COVID as an excuse, calling for de-densification in the name of social distancing, in the same breath as calling for the 27,000 person development in the CBD at that time. The long-term result threatens to mimic the trajectory of cities like Johannesburg or even American cities like Detroit, which has seen what urban planners have referred to as a donut-shaped collapse. The inner city becomes economically unsustainable and crime-ridden to the point where the police can't even go there, causing urban flight to outlying suburbs. But while the local impact of this kind of dense influx into the inner city is downward pressure on the housing prices, the overall impact of the city's lax policies regarding land invasions is a raising of property prices. The combination of foreign promotion of local luxury properties in areas such as Sea Point with the restriction of available land through illegal settlements, as we are seeing in Hout Bay, has made land extremely scarce in the more inner parts of Cape Town, and many can no longer afford to live in the city itself at all and must commute in from farther afield like Parel or any of the northern suburbs, for example. In observing these catastrophes, it is worth mentioning that at no point has the DA attempted to use their majority in the provincial parliament to seek a way to close the loophole in eviction law, which allows squatters to take advantage of property rights despite housing being a concurrent area of provincial and national competence under the Constitution. In theory, it may be possible to argue that this has a very slim chance of success, but the DA has already tabled 50 private members' bills in the National Assembly, which they know will never get a majority support ever in this country. What all this chaos has given rise to is a system where everybody has to struggle. The informal settlements remain squalid, the middle class struggle to pay their bills, And while ratepayers are subject to strict and often draconian regulations, the poor are subject to no regulation whatsoever, creating a two-tier city where only the very financially well-off can live in comfort. If we look at Hill Lewis's urban development, we have to start with the VPUU program, which was proposed in 2005 by the outgoing ANC administration and was embraced with enthusiasm by then Zille's team, who partnered with left-leaning academics from the University of Cape Town and the German Development Bank to give title deeds and utility connections to land invaders all over Cape Town as a city. Of course, back then, there were not as many land invaders as we are seeing now, not even a tenth of what we are seeing currently in Cape Town. The flagship model implemented during this time was the Violence Prevention through Urban Upgrading program, which has a devastating effect on the city's land availability even today. While many blame high property values on the influx of middle-class migrants from all over the northern part of the country, or tourists flocking to Airbnbs, or the influx of global capital for holiday homes and property speculation, a significant part of the picture is the land tied up by these informal settlements who were given the title deeds under this VPUU plan of Helen Zille. Helen Zille and Jordan Hill Lewis have on many occasions boasted of the success of this initiative, but by creating an incentive for land invasions, they have made the Western Cape the most informally settled province in the entire country, and not many people are aware of this fact that the Western Cape has the most informal settlements in the entire country, as many as 35% of the entire country. A brief look at the general household survey over the years shows a pattern of decline that is simply not visible elsewhere in any other city or any other province in South Africa. Looking at the reported proportion of the population who live in formal versus informal settlements, we can see that the Western Cape was once third in the country for the rate of formalized housing among its population. By 2023, however, it had fallen to dead last. Of all the metropolitan municipalities, only Durban has a lower rate of formal housing than Cape Town, and not by a significant amount either. At many turns, the DA has boasted of how much money it spent on the poor, allocating 75% of the budget to serving these so-called poor areas, or what we know as informal settlements, but this comes at a massive cost. Compliance with basic laws and payment of rates and tariffs is extremely low to zero in these so-called informal settlements, and each year the city must write off millions, sometimes into the hundreds of millions, in unpaid utility bills from Cape Town's informal settlements. The effect on the budget has been severe. ACDP City Councillor Grant Haskin reported in council last year that the city has been writing off billions in bad debt every budget cycle since 2006, or since Helen Zille started giving title deeds away to every land invader in the city. At first they blamed the ANC, but eventually it became impossible to address this directly to the ANC.
The reality is that no matter how one packages it, no matter how one understands it, no matter what words one puts to describe it in different ways from last time, the reality is that this is still customer debt being written off as irrecoverable. That's what we're talking about here. So the ACDP's got three concerns. Firstly, it's been said that this is a once-off debt write-off. I think I've heard that 4 times in my time as councillor. So this is not once-off, this is another once-off. It's happened before, firstly. Secondly, it's never just a few million rand here and there. It's always a few billion rand. In 2006, whenever it was in that period, 8-9, then we blamed it on the ANC, who had been governing before. And it was easy to do that because their debt collection policy wasn't very good, careless, and so it was easy to just blame it on the previous government. Now you can't, because it's the same government.
This year, Cape Town balanced its budget and found a surplus for the very first time in this century. But this was achieved at a very high cost. In order to plug this massive gap created by this almost bottomless pit of money that the DA has created with the VPUU, the city committed to selling off over R1 billion worth of municipal assets, counting its shares in the Cape Town Convention Centre worth R885 million and dozens of smaller properties auctioned off in the past calendar year. In 2025, they sold off properties worth $262 million, with $77 million worth sold in the fourth quarter alone. They received an additional $401 million in irregular grants from the National Treasury or from the government and made up the rest with flat tariff increases so draconian that they attracted legal opposition from organizations representing every sector of the residential market in Cape Town. This court case, which draws in the South African Property Owners Association or SAPOA and AfriForum and Sakeliga, with several amicus curiae including ratepayer associations and the Good Party and many others, has alienated not just the middle class but even the mostly coloured working class, whose electrical bills and water bills rose massively. The DA defends their policy in the courts on the basis of wealth redistribution, read communism, but this renders their criticisms of Action SA's Tshwane Mayoralty's cleansing tariff, which they called illegal and unconstitutional and a rip-off, extremely hypocritical. Similar flat rates have been rolled out across DA municipalities to subsidize these massively growing sectors of the landscape which do not pay for their utilities at all, which is becoming the biggest problem in the Western Cape right now, given that they are the province with the most informal settlements or squatter camps of any province in this country because of these policies that are described by the DA. It has often been observed in council by secessionists like Jack Miller that residents pay a great deal of taxes but receive little to nothing in return, with the Western Cape paying R320 billion in 2025 and getting back just R75 billion in services. When Jordan Hill-Lewis was challenged on why he does not ask for a recalculated increase from Treasury under the Division of Revenue Act, he told Miller that someone has to subsidize Buffalo City, as if that should be particularly the people that he represents as Cape Town Mayor. The most egregious example of the hypocrisy after the cleansing tariff may well be their dual stance on Eskom's rates. In 2022 and 2023, Cape Town imposed a almost 10% tariff or 9.6% tariff increase, exceeding the 7.4% approved by the National Energy Regulator of South Africa or NERSA. For 2023 and 2024, the hike was a massive 17.6% compared to the sanctioned 13.1%. Over the past several years, the city has discreetly used ratepayer funds to litigate against NERSA, seeking judicial approval to disregard the national tariff. This practice has led to substantial overcharges amounting to hundreds of millions of rands. In rare sentiments last year, the city defended its actions by arguing that adherence to NERSA's tariff for 2023 and 4 would result in a 500 million shortfall. Should the city lose its court battle, these funds would need to be refunded to the consumers or the normal ratepayers, including the previous many years of excess charges where the DA-run Cape Town has massively increased their prices. The city has, for example, spent hundreds of millions of rands on Cape Town's 550 kilometer of cycle lanes, which are used by less than 0.1% of the population. This is what they call paying back your money. You see, do an interesting thought experiment. Go, if you are a Cape Town resident, go and look at your municipal bill. How much do you pay for 1 unit or 1 kilowatt hour of electricity? I can tell you what I pay. I pay R2.25. What do you pay? And then you see what the difference between Cape Town and the rest of the country is. The aim of all of this wasteful expenditure is ultimately to expand the votes the party get. You see, according to the DA's logic, if they give all of this free stuff away to these people living in the informal settlements who are mostly black, these black people would start voting for the DA someday. The party relies heavily on the theory that their victory in Cape Town showed the Western Cape that they can fix things, leading to people throwing off the ANC. But the reality is, this could not be further from the truth. The DA simply inherited the National Party's largely racial minority constituency, which dipped in turnout for one electoral cycle as the National Party imploded and members crossed the floor to the ANC right after the new National Party actually merged with the DP, the Democratic Party back then, to form the DA. Since taking over the province, the DA has not been able to expand their support beyond this largely white and partly colored demographic that used to vote for the National Party, and has been losing ground in the past decade with 16 hung councils across areas inhabited by these minorities in the Western Cape. The DA, as several Cape Town City councillors have admitted, under cover of anonymity, no longer campaigns in black areas at all, since they realized after a certain point that the DA campaigns would drive up black voter turnout, and those voters would invariably vote for the ANC and EFF, meaning that their campaigning in the black areas actually hurts them. You see, giving out KFC and blue t-shirts to these people in these settlements only led to these people actually going to vote, driving up the voter turnout and making the ANC get more voters. By cultivating black voter apathy, the DA has managed to maintain a grip on the province despite rapidly changing demographics. White voters typically turn out to vote at least 1.67 times the rate of the average voter when factoring in both voter registration rate and turnout of registered voters. If you compare white voters to black voters on the other hand, and not all voters including coloreds and Indians, white voters are almost 2.5 times more likely to vote than black voters specifically. The DA have been selling their own voter base out for the people who will never vote for them, and liquidating their property and destroying their hometown in the very process. The proportion of black people in the city has risen geometrically over the past couple of decades, most of whom remain in informal settlements like Khayelitsha, Kayamandi. These informal settlements are home to now over 1.5 million people. That is 88% of the size of the population not born in the province. To date, there is no sign whatsoever that black people in Cape Town are any likelier to vote DA than at any other point in time since 1994. Meaning, the DA simply did not grow their constituency among black voters at all since their very inception when they merged with the NNP to form the DA with the DP. As for corruption, the DA has managed a reputation for clean governance, but as the Cape Independent has reported in several cases, including Drakensberg, the Garden Route, Swellendam, Hesekwa, and specifically the big case Stellenbosch, the DA does not hold its people to account at all whatsoever, and often promote those embroidered in corruption scandals to Parliament before they can be investigated by local council, such as Memory Boyson, Conrad Pool, and Eleanor Bow Spies. You see, the tactic here is simple: for the DA to maintain this image of not being a party of corruption, they cannot afford to hold these people accountable, because then it would point out corruption within the DA. So they rather just move these people away quickly and silently before they can be investigated, to keep their image as a corruption-free party. But in the case of Cape Town, corruption scandals are not uncommon either. In 2023, Malusi Boy, the councillor in charge of the Housing Department, also known as the Department of Human Settlements, was arrested on charges of bribery and tender fraud for striking corrupt deals with Glowmix, a front company for the 28's gang. Since 2019, both Fadil Adams of the National Coloured Congress and Fayez Jacobs of the ANC had publicly raised the issue. Jordan Hill-Lewis managed to look the other way for 4 years, and the party only acted when the police raided Boy's offices themselves. It took the murder of city staff member Wendy Kloppers for authorities in the DA to take the issue seriously finally, and only after Boy was arrested did the city blacklist the companies associated with his corrupt scheme perpetrated by DA members. But this isn't the only major corruption scandal under Jordan Hill-Lewis which he tried to sweep under the carpet. In 2024, the city's Urban Waste Management Directorate was hit by misconduct allegations. Director Luzuko Mdunyelwa was fired in August 2024 following disciplinary proceedings over service delivery failures and related issues. Separately, a 186 million rands waste management tender came under scrutiny for potential corruption, with senior managers accused of failing to disclose conflicts of interest involving company ties. In late 2025, a major tender fraud probe emerged involving contracts valued at roughly 1.6 billion rands, primarily in the urban mobility and construction sectors in Cape Town's municipality. Triggered by a whistleblower and internal forensic findings, the case led to police raids on 26 properties in October of last year in Cape Town. Jordan Hill-Lewis has had some of the best press and one of the fastest moving political careers in South African history. This would not be possible if he did not have intelligence and political talent. But equally, he has wholeheartedly embraced extreme, dangerous left-wing ideas which threaten to destroy his city in the long run, in the next 10 years maybe. These policies that he has endorsed takes decades to bear fruit in an obvious way, but we can already see their effects. They are the same acquiescent policies the DA has taken from the beginning. For so many years now, going on decades actually, this party, the DA, has dedicated itself on the imitation of the ANC, just with better scores on key performance indicators. All this means is that with Jordan Hill-Lewis, we will not be getting a renewed DA or a DA that's moving away from their ANC-light behavior, but just as we have seen under John Steenhuisen, we will be getting a slightly more efficient and middle-class ANC. The DA's voters deserve better than managed decline in their areas. In another recent video, we actually outlined exactly how Jordan Hill-Lewis is responsible for irreversibly changing the Western Cape's demographics. Check out that full report by clicking on this link appearing on your screen right now. And please do consider supporting our work by becoming a paid member of the Willem Petzer Group. Only with you investing in us are we able to keep these videos going every single day, pay everyone's salaries, and keep this channel going. Just follow the easy steps underneath me. Goodbye and God bless.